Hi there, welcome to podcast episode number 19. I have a lot to catch you up on. I finished 2 full sweaters, which is great because for last podcast episode I actually finished my first sweater project of the year. I feel like the curse has been broken and now we can finally get into proper knitting here. I have 2 new whips, or somewhat new whips at least, and I have a few plans, so let's get started and I'll tell you all about what I've been up to. My first finished object is actually also what I'm wearing. This is called 𝗙𝗡𝗄𝗧 and it is a vintage Icelandic colorwork sweater. And the reason why I knitted this is actually because I had some léttlopi yarn at home. I originally got that to design something with and it wasn't working out and I was just not vibing with it anymore, so I decided I'm gonna use that yarn to knit some kind of pattern. And then I stumbled across this one, which I've actually had in one of my pattern roundups. I think it was my colorwork sweater pattern roundup. And I included this one because I've always wanted to knit like a vintage colorwork pattern. And I found this one again and I was so in love with it. I think the little horses on it are so cute. And with the yarn amounts I had at home, it was kind of working out perfectly. I made some adjustments, but I'm gonna get to those. So it was the perfect yarn for the project. It's an Icelandic pattern, it's an Icelandic yarn, it's also the recommended yarn, and I believe the pattern was actually published by the yarn company. I'm not exactly sure when. I could just find out that it's a vintage pattern, but it never said anywhere when it was actually made, so I'm not quite sure from when this pattern is, but from the way it was written it seemed very vintage, and also from the picture that came with it. So I made a number of adjustments to this to make it a little bit more modern, but first of all, for the basic facts, this is léttlopi yarn, obviously. I've used the white, and I think the blue is called navy blue and the red is called garnet red, and I had at home 1 ball of the red, 3 balls of the blue, and I think 10 balls of the white, and I knitted that on a 4mm needle to get gauged. And it was working out in a way where I was pretty close to the yarn amounts that I was supposed to have for each of the colors, but not quite. So I knitted the men's size in this. The pattern comes in only 3 sizes, so children's, women's and men's. I think that's pretty normal for older patterns. It's not very size inclusive, but I just thought that for me, I would prefer to knit the men's version and have a lot of positive ease. And the way that the pattern is designed, you have the chart or the colorwork chart here for the men's version, and then for the women's version and the children's version, you're supposed to omit some of the rows to make the yoke shorter. And you're obviously working like a different number of pattern repeats in the round. So I decided I would just knit the biggest yoke that is available, so I didn't omit any rows and I knitted the men's amount of pattern repeats, and that way I got this like size yoke, which is very cozy, oversized on me, which is exactly what I was intending. And then for the rest of the sweater I just kind of modified like a length as I needed. I believe last time we chatted about this in a podcast episode, I had the yoke done already. And from there on out, it was really just very basic stockinette knitting in the round. The rest of the sweater is just white, the background color here. But I'm going to walk you through everything I've changed about this. First of all, I knitted everything top down. In the pattern, it is all bottom up, as it is for most older patterns, but I just prefer to work things top down. And also I was kind of unsure with my yarn amounts. I had 10 balls of the white, which was the recommended amount, but I made some changes to the color work. And I wasn't sure if me shortening the body and the sleeves would give me enough yarn that I would have enough to make the background color of the yoke the white as well. So just to be extra sure that I'm not running out of yarn, or I can see it coming when I'm running out of yarn, and I am at a point in the sweater where I can still modify something to, finish it properly, I decided to knit everything top down. So for the collar here, I already cast on more stitches than is in the pattern. All of the finishings in the pattern are very tight, which I guess is just because the sweater is supposed to be a functional sweater in the winter to keep the cold out, so you would want the hem and the collar and the cuffs and everything to be tight to your body. But I don't live in a place that's that cold, and I just wanted the sweater because it looked pretty, so that wasn't quite necessary for me, and I thought it would be more comfortable to have everything be a bit wider. So for the collar here, I cast on the amount of stitches that you're supposed to have for the yoke here. So usually you would work the collar with less stitches and then increase here, but I just started with that amount of stitches. And then I knitted the double folded collar here, and I knitted that in half twisted rib just because I wanted to. I did the inside in the normal ribbing and it looked so uneven that that was actually the reason why I started doing the half twisted rib here. And I don't know, I like always knew that technique existed, and I think I've used it a few times, like when it was in the pattern, but somehow the bug just landed on my window. It's like huge. Okay, Somehow I never started like properly knitting half-twisted rib just because I wanted to. I guess at the time when I last used it, I felt like it didn't look that much cleaner than my normal ribbing, but I think at this point it really does. I don't know if I got more careless with knitting my normal ribbing or whether I just got better at doing the half-twisted rib. I think I'm generally just a bit of a faster knitter now, so it doesn't bother me as much to spend some extra time to do the knit through the back loop. I mean, it's basically as fast as the normal ribbing to me at this point. I think if I were to knit full twisted rib, that would take me a lot longer. I think the purling through the back loop is really annoying, but for just knitting through the back loop, that's fine to me, like when I'm working in the round here. So I modified that, and then for the yoke here, I tried to stay with the pattern as much as I could, but due to the yarn amounts I modified the background color of the rest of the sweater essentially. So usually there would be one more colorwork motif under here, under the horses, and there you would switch your main background color. So for the yoke you would, for example, use what is in my case the blue now, and then what is the blue now would be the white, and then the rest of the sweater would be white. I don't know how much sense that makes, but essentially I didn't want to switch the background color because I didn't have enough yarn to do a different background color for the yoke. And also with the colors that I did have with this red and this blue, I think they look stunning next to each other like this, but I don't think it would have worked if one of them would have been in the background and the other one on top. I don't think they have enough contrast for that. So that was just a change that I made because of my yarn, not because I necessarily wanted to, but I really like the way it looks as well. I think I see it in a lot of like older patterns that the yoke will have a different color, and despite me keeping all of the color work and the patterns the same, I feel like it gave the sweater a much more modern look to keep the background color the same all the way throughout. So I actually ended up really liking that modification, even though it wasn't necessarily planned for design purposes when I made it. And for the rest of the yoke, I just followed the pattern. I have one like little hiccup with this pattern repeat here, or this little circle, because one pattern repeat includes two of the circles, and for one of them there is this random like white stitch here, and I'm not exactly certain if that is intended in the pattern, like if that's the design of it, or if it was also supposed to be a full circle and there's just the wrong color in the chart. I can't really tell in the picture what it looks like there because it's black and white and, you know, old and blurry. So I'm not sure whether that's intended, but I stuck to the pattern and it doesn't bother me right now. Like after I got done knitting it, it kind of bothered me. I thought it would have looked nicer to have the circle be complete, but I mean, at this point, there's so much going on up here that I don't really think you can tell unless you like specifically look at it. And this part of the yoke was actually really, really fun to knit. I really enjoy knitting colorwork and I haven't in a while, so I like flew through this in 2 evenings. It's very easy colorwork too. It looks very nice, but the floats are, I think, 4 stitches at most, so it was very, very simple and you know, just enjoyable to knit. And then for the horses, it got a little bit more complicated. I took the time to plan out my float management in the back before I started on the horse, and I'm quite glad I did that. So there are a lot of sections here where like over the horse you use the blue, and then there's like a lot of white before the next blue part starts, and also here for the body of the horse you use a lot of the blue, and then you know, you have very short sections of the white in between. So I have some jacquard ladders in the back wherever that was happening, and like some catching my floats, but it was fine. Like I don't think the pattern intends for you to do all that, and I think if you're using the recommended yarn for this, the léttlopi, it grabs onto itself very well. It's very rustic, so I think if you're just like normally catching your float every few stitches without thinking about it that much, you should absolutely be fine. And then, as I said, I just omitted the last motif here, so I actually had some space underneath to include some short rows. I think for a sweater this oversized it wouldn't be necessary to include the short rows, but I had some space left over anyway, and I also feel like this yarn, as I said, it's very rustic, so it's not the most comfortable close to skin, and I just thought if I can avoid it pulling up here and sitting like super close to my neck, I should probably do so. So I think I added 10 rows in total to the back of it that are not in the front. And then I connected in the round and started working on the sleeves first, I think. So for the sleeves, I picked up 4 extra stitches under the arm here to close this little gap that always happens when you're working a sweater top down. I don't think that would be necessary in the pattern because you're working it the other way around, so you're later grafting the underarm together, and that way you won't have any gaps there anyway, but for the way that I worked, I thought that would be more practical. And then I just decreased those over the first few rows here. I think I knitted like 2.5 or 3 centimeters without decreases before I started on my decrease pattern, in a pattern that is way longer, like this section where you just work straight down, because for the men's version the sleeves are longer than what I knitted. And then for the decreases, I actually also slightly modified that, so I knitted a decrease row I think every 8th row, and then I did that 11 times. And I actually did a bit of an experiment where for the one sleeve I only did 10 repeats and the other sleeve I did 11 repeats. And then for the shorter sleeve I knitted a wider cuff. So I did an increase row before the cuff at first, just to see what it would look like if the sleeve went more like straight down. I guess this is more of a balloon sleeve, so it's a bit longer and it like falls over the cuff that is pretty tight to my wrist. And I thought the wider option would maybe go better with the sweater, but I ended up not really liking it that much, just because the sweater looked a bit disproportional because the rest of it was so large and then the sleeve was comparatively so short. So I thought it looked better with the longer sleeve, and then I made the cuff tighter obviously so I can still roll it up and it won't get in my way. And for that I actually just followed the exact instructions in the pattern for the cuff, so that is just knitted straight down from the sleeve without any increasing or decreasing. And I also did the half twisted rib on here. And then for the body, it was just knitting stockinette in the round. I also didn't make the body very long, so it didn't take too long, just like a few days of me doing some mindless knitting. And then I made one last modification before the hem, where I knitted an increase row. So in the pattern you would actually knit decreases at that point to make the hem tighter, but I prefer if my hem just falls straight down from the circumference of the sweater and it doesn't get any tighter. And obviously if you're going to a smaller needle size, which I used a 3.5mm needle for all of the ribbing on this, it's gonna cinch in a bit, which I wanted to avoid, so I knitted some increases there. And then I just did the ribbing and half twisted 1x1 rib again. For my experience working with this pattern, I think it was actually quite fun. I really liked doing a pattern that was so short. I think at this point I know enough about knitting to make some of the decisions that modern patterns would hold your hand about by myself. So I could like figure out by myself what kind of increase I wanted to do, and I could figure out by myself how I needed to space them to get the correct number of increases. Like all that was really fine to me, and I really appreciated having this overview page where I could have all of the instructions in one spot and then just the chart. I think sometimes it gets a bit difficult to read longer patterns because you're kind of, getting lost in all of the instructions. So this was a nice breath of fresh air, but also, as I said, the pattern is mostly pretty easy. The most complicated part by far is this horse color work here. And even that, you wouldn't need to make it as complicated as I did it. So for that, the instructions were definitely more than enough. And for my experience with this yarn, I like it a lot. I think I would use it again for a sweater like this. That is like definitely an oversized winter sweater that I'm always going to be wearing something underneath. I would not put it very close to skin. It's not super uncomfortable to me. I feel like it's a bit scratchy, but it's not itchy. It's not like making me actively think about I'm wearing this sweater all the time while I have this on. But like if you pay attention to it, it's definitely noticeable where it's touching your skin, or at least for me it is. I would say like medium sensitive to yarns. There's definitely people who struggle with it a lot more than me, but I'm a bit sensitive to alpaca yarns, mostly if they're a bit more rustic. There are some like very soft alpacas that I don't have a problem with at all, but for some of the alpaca yarns, they feel very uncomfortable to me. Usually for wool, I'm pretty much fine, so this is very much tolerable to me. I have like a short sleeve t-shirt underneath, and it doesn't bother me on my arms at all. I can feel it on my neck a little bit here, but as I said, it's fine. I maybe wouldn't knit like a scarf out of this, but well, any like bigger sweater would be completely fine by me, and I really enjoyed working with this yarn too. I like when yarns have a bit of a halo. I think it looks very cool, and also because it's a bit more rustic, it feels more durable than some of the other wools I've worked with. So I've actually worn this like hiking and stuff like that. So I mean, it's still a knitted sweater, so you still don't want to get caught in any branches or anything like that, but it feels like kind of what it was probably intended for, like designed for. Like, actually a usable sweater that is intended to keep the cold out and intended to be worn while you're outside and doing stuff, more than like a precious thing you only put on for special occasions inside, which I actually quite like. So paired with the right project, this is a great yarn, I think. That brings me to my only issue right now, which is that I have quite a bit of yarn left over. I think I shortened the body quite significantly, so I ended up not running out of my white yarn at all, because I have, I think, like a ball and a half of the white and 2 full balls of blue and like a good half ball of the red left over. So it's like not really enough yarn to make something like a sweater vest, for example, but it's also like too much to just do a hat. So I'm like kind of caught in the middle. The only project I could think of that would work with this yarn amount really well would be a scarf, but as I said, I don't think a scarf would be very comfortable around here. So I have this yarn laying around now and I don't know what to do with it, which is not the worst problem to have, but I need some inspiration, so I would love if you could provide me some. My second finished object is this. This is my Esther jacket by Petite Knit. This is an all-over structure cardigan that features these like diamond triangle motifs that are done with pearl stitches and moss stitch, and these long knitted lines that run all the way through, and then there's some bigger moss stitch sections here for the underarm. And I fell in love with this design right when I started knitting, I think, and I got yarn for it pretty soon after. So this is filcolana Peruvian. And I also got the pattern for it, so I had all of that at home, but somehow I never quite got to casting this on. I think at the time I had a bunch of whips still, so I wanted to finish them fast, and then when I did finish them, it started getting warm already, so I didn't cast it on in the summer, obviously, so it was just a whole like back and forth of me having this yarn at home and not starting on the project. And then I ended up swatching for it, I think in the middle of summer actually, because I was like so determined to cast this on as soon as possible. And I hit gauge on a 3.5mm needle at that time, which is a very tiny needle because the pattern recommends you use a 5mm needle, and I'm more on the looser side for my knitting tension, I think. So for most patterns I size down my needle like at least half the needle size, but at the time I think I was an even looser knitter, so the 3.5mm was just what gave me gauge at the time. And then when I finally started on the project like half a year later, I didn't swatch for it again. I just used my swatches that I had made in the summer. And well, I knitted the back panel here. So you start in the back and you knit this trapezoidal shape here for the back. And I think I finished that before like I measured the length of it, and I noticed I was some centimeters smaller than what I was supposed to have for my size. I was knitting a size large at the time. And then I blocked it to see if it would get any bigger, and it didn't. So instead of doing what I should have done at that point, and just swatching again, unraveling, starting over, I decided I would just pivot to making a different size. Because in the pattern there's one chart for the smaller sizes and one chart for the bigger sizes, and I was working the chart for the bigger sizes anyway, so at that point it was still pretty easy to just pivot to doing the 2XL, and I did that. So I kept working on my 3.5mm needle and just, you know, working a different size. So I got through the back panel, it was already done. Then I picked up here for the shoulders. I knitted both of these front panels. I knitted all of the body. I knitted the hem. And then I started picking up for my first sleeve. And that is where the major problems came in. So as I said, there is this moss stitch section under the arm here. And it's already like here for the body. And then obviously like a larger part of it under the sleeve here. So I could just see when working the sleeve in the front here that my tension was very different. So the moss stitch looked very uneven for my first version of the body here, and it was a lot tidier on the sleeve, and also my gauge was a lot tighter because I suddenly started working in the round, and the body was obviously like worked flat because it's a cardigan and you can't work it in the round. So it wasn't working out, and I picked up the second sleeve with a 4mm needle, hoping that that would fix the issue, because some people just have trouble hitting the same gauge in the round as they hit knitting flat. So I just thought that would probably be the problem, and I tried knitting the sleeve on the 4mm needle for a while, and I was still running into the same problem that the body part just looked very uneven. I was also pretty unhappy with my hem because it was cinching in on me, which, as I said, I don't really like. And then I started to pick apart like little details about it, that my cast on was too tight or whatever, things like that. And I ended up just putting the project away to be worried about at a later time, essentially. And then it was laying around for a few weeks before I had an epiphany, and I thought, you know what, maybe I should be working on a whole different needle size. Like maybe the moss stitch in my body looks uneven because I'm on a 3.5mm needle for this project and this yarn, which is not really working out. And at that point I finally swatched for it again, and I hit gauge on my 5mm needle. So yeah, I actually somehow convinced myself to completely start over. I unraveled my first version of the project. There was like 10 balls of yarn in there, And I cast on my back panel again, and my two shoulders over here, and the body and everything. It went a lot faster the second time around. I think the first time I had a lot of trouble like picking this project up. I would always like put it down, forget about it for 2 or 3 weeks, and then pick it up again. And since this pattern repeat is quite like large and you need to do a lot of counting, I had like trouble staying in the pattern repeat, like remembering what I was doing. So it was never the most fun project to me. So the second time I really made sure that I stuck with it, and it went a lot faster also because, you know, my gauge was better. So I was just knitting less stitches and less rows and everything. But yeah, also because I was actually working on it continuously. It was a bit boring to do it for the second time. I'm not a huge pattern repeater. Even if I love the finished object, I don't usually love one finished object enough to do the pattern again. I think a large part of my fun in knitting comes from like figuring new things out. So knitting the same pattern twice isn't usually what I do. Obviously, in this case, it made it like easier the second time around, but it wasn't quite as fun to me. And while I was knitting, I obviously tried to fix the parts that I was unhappy with the first time around. So my cast on is a lot stretchier up here, that was good. And then for the hem, I actually knitted an increase row before that one too. This is my second iteration of the hem, by the way, so I ended up unraveling that again. But that was because of my cuff, so let's talk about the sleeve first. For the sleeve, I did stick with the 5mm needle, and that ended up working out fine. I think usually my gauge is pretty similar when I knit flat compared to knitting in the round, so I think these two parts look matching now. And you knit that with some like moss stitch under the arm and the pattern repeat up top here. And I believe that was the point I was at for the last podcast episode. So I was working on the first sleeve. I ended up running into some trouble with it because I made it a bit longer and I knitted an extra increase, and then I had to do some modifications to the way I studded the cuff. Like I studded it, I think, a third of a round further down than it was supposed to. So my knit columns here would like properly match up with the knit columns that are in the pattern already, but that was my fault, so that was perfectly fine. But at that time when I got to the cuff, I had already worked this sweater here, and I was so in love with the half twisted 1x1 rib that I thought I should do it for this project as well. So as you can see, I worked the cuff in the half twisted 1x1 rib. And then obviously I also had to do the other cuff. And then, as I said, I knitted the entire hem again because it was not a half twisted 1x1 rib. It was just normal ribbing at first. So I unraveled that one again and I knitted it again in the half twisted rib. I mean, I was also unhappy with it before because it was still cinching in a little bit. I could have done more increases before I started on it, and for this version of it I did, so it now actually falls straight down on me. And then obviously I also had to modify my button band here and the collar to be the half twisted rib, but I mean, it was fine. It wasn't like any complicated modifications. I just picked up some more stitches along the sides here, and then I actually also knitted some of the rows in the button band twice because I feel like it was just not like wide enough before. If I would have just stuck to the pattern, I think it would have looked a bit weird because my buttons would have like barely fit on the button band. So I made it a bit wider than what is in the pattern. But yeah, that was also entirely on me for knitting the half twisted rib. I think if I had just done the normal ribbing, it would have been, you know, the gauge of it would have been a little bit looser, so that would have been fine. And well, then for the collar, I obviously also changed the ribbing, but it was one like small decision that ended up having a lot of consequences for the rest of this project because there is a lot of ribbing in here. Anyways, I finally got it done somehow, and I'm very happy with the outcome. I've actually been wearing this a bunch. This is like wool, but I mean, I guess because it is wool, it is pretty good at regulating your body temperature. So even though it is quite warm here already, it's already like 20 degrees some days, so it's not really the time of year that calls for like a wool jacket, wool cardigan, but I've been wearing this a lot and I've still been really comfortable in it. And I don't know, I'm very happy to have it done. I'm very happy with the outcome. I'm really, really glad I started over on it. I think the only thing that bothers me about it a tiny bit is that the button band up here is kind of gaping apart a bit, like between the first two buttons. I actually included 2 extra buttons into the button band because I saw that problem when I was scrolling through the Ravelry projects page. Like a few people had that issue where they had the 5 buttons that are in the pattern, and then in between the buttons, the button band would kind of fall apart. And I didn't really like the way that looked, so I added some extra buttons to make sure that wouldn't happen for mine. And it doesn't for the other buttons, but up here for the first 2, it kind of still does. I think that's just because the first button is in the collar, and it's just, you know, tighter up here than it is further down in the body. So I don't think there's anything I can do to fix that. I could maybe just pull some yarn through both of these button bands here to make them sit in the same spot. Obviously then I can't open the cardigan anymore, but I honestly don't think I'll be wearing it open anyway. But yeah, I'm gonna see. For now I'm gonna just leave it that way, and we'll see about it. I went on a bit of a tangent about my issues with this pattern in my project vlog on the Esther jacket, so I'm not going to repeat all of that here, but essentially I ran into a few like little inconsistencies in the pattern that didn't make a lot of sense to me, which none of them were a huge issue. I just felt like, I don't know, it wasn't always like very well thought through the way that the pattern was written. Obviously you can still work with it very well, and you can get the finished object out of it. It is a pretty standard petite knit pattern, and it is also rated, I think, 5 out of 5 stars on her difficulty scale. So I think if you feel up to knitting a pattern like that, you can figure out all of the issues that I was talking about there. But you can, as I said, hear more in depth about my problems with that in the project vlog. For the yarn, I really loved working with it. I think I would absolutely use it again for a garment like this that has like structure, or, you know, where you need a lot of stitch definition. I think for like most stockinette projects, it would probably be my preference to have a bit more of a halo for the yarn, but for this it was absolutely great. I think it's very comfortable to wear. It was very easy to work with, and it's definitely on my to be used again yarns list. And then, because I knitted this one actually, I felt a bit inspired to cast on like a basic stockinette project, because I've been working the Esther jacket, which had a lot of structure, obviously. Last podcast episode I showed my finished ribbling sweater, which also had a lot of structure. And then this, the rest of it was mindless, but obviously up here there was a lot going on with the color work and all that. So when I got to these parts where it was just knitting in the round and doing nothing, I noticed I had really missed that, so I wanted to do just a basic stockinette project, and I ended up casting on the Cloud Blouse by Petite Knit. So I'm knitting another Petite Knit pattern. I don't know, I wanted to do a mohair blouse for a while, and I had a couple of different options on my wish list. But I ended up going with this one because the yarn amounts that I had. So the yarn that I'm using is the Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair, and I originally got this to hold with the merino, and the 2 colors that I got to hold together, they just don't really work together. So I think I will be doing whatever with the merino at some point, but I'm now using this soft silk mohair to knit the Cloud Blouse. And I would technically, for my size, need 9 balls of this, but I only have 7. So I was like this close to ordering more yarn, and then I decided I'm just gonna cast on. I'm gonna see how far I get with what I have, what I can do here, because I like have knitted a few projects recently where I had quite a lot of yarn left over, and as I said with the léttlopi that I have left over from here, sometimes it's a bit difficult to figure out what to do with these leftovers. I feel like I don't get yarns that are similar enough to do like a proper scrappy project at some point. Even just this yarn and the filcolana I have, like I would never hold them together in a project, I guess. So I'm just like usually knitting a sweater and then a random accessory with the leftovers, and you know, I just don't want to be producing more leftovers than I need to produce. So I'm just making it hard on myself to figure out what to do with all of them. So I decided I'm just going to cast on. I'm only going to order more yarn if I really need to, because at this point I've had this yarn for a few months and I don't think I'm getting the same dye lot anyway, so it's really whatever. For this one, it's a similar construction to the Esther jacket actually. I cast on in the back and then you knit this trapezoidal back panel. You do it in a bit of a different way. So for the Esther jacket, you cast on the stitches up here for the neckline, and then you shape these trapezoidal parts with increases. And here you cast on like all of the stitches at first, and then you do the shaping with short rows. So this pattern includes a lot of short rows for all kinds of sections. And I think for this specific design, that is fine by me. It's obviously a very fluffy yarn, and I'm also using a dark color. I think knitting that many short rows wouldn't necessarily always be my preference. I think you can always see that double stitch that is created a little bit. but for here, obviously you can't see anything at all, so that's been fine. And well, it was a bit of a new thing to me to be knitting that many short rows for the shaping. And then the back panel, you just knit it straight down in stockinette, you knit it flat, and then you pick up stitches for these shoulder sections up here. So both of the shoulders are actually quite short, it's just like this much knitting, I think. And it works in a similar way to the back panel, so you pick up these stitches and then you actually do some increases over here to shape the neck line, I guess. And this section over here is also done with short rows though, so you're still working short rows, and then same thing for the other side obviously. And then under here, under the neck, you connect both of these front panels and you work them flat as well. So it was a lot of knitting flat, but also like mindless knitting. And now I connected in the round, and it only became more mindless from here because, well, now I only have to do the knit rows really. There aren't any stitches cast on at the underarm when connecting in the round, which I've never done that way before, but I also didn't want to modify this to add any because, well, if I don't have enough yarn, I would rather not add any extra stitches that are not needed. But, well, this is what it looks like. And now I'm just doing mindless knitting in the round, which is actually really nice. It is a bit of a different experience than working the patterns I've recently been working on, because the yarn is, as I said, it's very fluffy and also very thin. So even though I'm holding it double, it's still quite a tiny strand. And I'm like a lot slower knitting this than I was knitting some of my other projects, just because the yarn is more difficult to grab onto with my needles. But generally, I mean, there's nothing happening in this project, and that's kind of exactly what I need right now. I've been enjoying picking this up a lot, even though, you know, usually I prefer to have something going on in my projects, but I think for right now, this like little mindless blouse here is exactly what I needed. I also think I'll be getting a lot of use out of this. I said in the beginning of the year that this year I want to knit more basics, because I noticed that last year I knitted like a lot of sweater projects that were very interesting, but that just ended up being a bit difficult for me to style or to integrate into my everyday life. And I think this will be one of those projects that I can just grab and throw on with anything really. And I mean, I don't have a ton to say about this. It's a very basic stockinette project. I've worked with this yarn before. I mean, it's a very popular one, so I don't think I need to tell you that it's really nice to work with. I will say their like online coloring always confuses me a bit. And I know that obviously if you take a photo of a yarn and you put it online, depending on your screen and, you know, just light and whatever, it might look a bit different in person than it looks in the picture online. Like, I'm aware of that, but I've never had that problem anywhere except with knitting for olive yarns. So I think this is the second time that I've ordered yarn from them, and it arrived and it looked very different than what I was intending. I think last spring I got pure silk and mohair from them that I wanted to hold together, that I thought were the same color, and then they arrived and they looked very different. It was still fine with that yarn combination at the time, but this time when I ordered a purple that ended up looking exactly like it actually looks in person. And then I ordered this one, which online looked grey, but it is very clearly blue in person. And I've looked at it on multiple different screens now because I was a bit like confused at the color difference, but it looks grey everywhere. So I'm not quite sure why that is. I would love to know if you've also noticed that problem with them, because I feel like I don't really hear other people talk about that, so maybe that's just me. But I'm a bit confused about it because it doesn't happen to me with other yarn brands, so I was just wondering where that came from. I mean, I'm fine with this color. I still think it's a nice color. I can definitely use it, but it was just not really usable to me for the intended purpose. So I don't know. I'm not sure where that's coming from, but well, it got put to good use either way. And then I have a second whip that is kind of old, kind of new. For Christmas, I got one skein of this Lana Grossa sock yarn. It is very colorful, but mostly pink. And I wanted to use this to make a pair of Sunday socks for myself. The Sunday socks is also a petite knit pattern, and it's a very basic ribbed worsted weight sock. And I knitted 2 pairs of those for a Christmas gift knit. And I just ended up deciding to do that pattern because it was worsted weight, so it wasn't taking super long, and I like that it had ribbing included. So even if you like can't get the person to try it on while you're working on it, I felt like it was very appropriate for a gift knit to just do something with ribbing, so it would definitely fit. And that gift knit ended up taking me quite a while because I kept trying to make modifications to the cuff. The cuff in the petite knit pattern is very long, but it doesn't have any shaping, so despite it being ribbed, I feel like with the length of it, it is quite uncomfortable to wear at your calf. And I didn't really like that, so I tried to change it, it didn't work out, and then I ended up realizing I don't even have enough yarn to make the sock that long, so there was a bunch of back and forth, and I ended up doing like 2 pairs of socks that were like very short, so the cuff was only a few centimeters, and I didn't run into that problem. Anyway, when I got this yarn for Christmas, I thought I should make a pair for myself, just because it's a very easy sock pattern. I'm not really a sock knitter, but I didn't have any other use for this yarn, and I have only tried to make myself 1 pair of socks. That was a miserable fail. It was also one of my first knitted projects, so it's fine, but I just don't have a hand knitted pair of socks from myself for myself. So I thought I'm just going to use the same pattern. I already have it, and it's pretty simple. I've practiced it twice now, so I think I can do it. Well, and I tried, I think, like 5 different versions of these Sunday socks before I gave up on them, because at first I wanted to do a provisional cast on, so I would like just knit the cuff at the end and see how long I could make it with the yarn that I had. And the provisional cast on ended up not working out at all with the ribbing, which I didn't do enough research on before I started, so it was entirely on me. And then I just tried to knit the sock top down like it was intended, and I tried to make adjustments to the cuff that ended up not really looking the way I wanted them to, so went back and forth there twice, and then I decided to just knit it to pattern. And I got to like the middle of the foot before I realized that I would have a lot of yarn left over, so I went back to the cuff, tried to make that longer, then I was running out of yarn. So I was just, I don't know, making like stupid modifications and stupid decisions all the time, and just not getting the socks done, even though it's such a quick project. So at some point, like last week, I just had enough of it, and I decided I'm gonna make a different pattern. I really liked about the Sunday socks that they were worsted weight, and I really liked that they were ribbed. So I tried to find a toe-up pattern that had the same attributes, and I ended up finding one called gullblanka by Maja Karlsson, and it's a free pattern too, which is great, but essentially it looks very similar to the Sunday sock pattern, just that it is done toe-up. So I set it down here. I actually learned how to do Judy's Magic cast on for this, and then it has some ribbing up top here that you can't really see with how colorful the yarn is, but this is all ribbing, and then the underside of the foot is done in stockinette. And then for the heel, I'm not exactly sure about all of the different heel constructions that there are, because I don't really knit socks a lot, but I think it's called a wrap and turn heel. Does that make sense? You do the wrap and turn stitch definitely on it. That was also new to me, never done that before, but I guess it's just a different way of doing short rows. And then it has ribbing for the cuff again. So I actually ended up knitting both socks up to this point. So right now I have this sock and then this sock, and now I can continue with the cuff. And for each of the cuffs, I still have a lot of yarn left over, so I think I will probably run into the same problem I already had with the cuff of the Sunday socks, that it just gets so long that even though it's ribbed, it's uncomfortable to wear. I'm not quite sure what I'll do about that yet, if I just knit the cuff short and call it a day and have leftover yarn, or whether I'll try to do increases in it to make it a bit wider. I think I'll see when I get there. This is just supposed to be a bit of a background project that I have laying around here that I can throw in my bag and take with me if I ever need to. It's obviously not super duper interesting, but I think if I want to knit socks at all, this is like the way to go for me. I like that it's toe up and I don't have to worry about my yarn amounts. I also found the process of the heel a bit easier with the toe up sock, because when I was knitting top down, the heel is like knitted on one needle only, and then you have to pick up the stitches from the sides before you can connect for the foot. And this way I didn't have to pick up any stitches, so that was nice. And with the ribbing, I don't need to like super duper worry about the sizing either, so I just don't think I'm a person who wants to knit like socks on 2.5mm needles. It's not for me. I don't know, I just feel like if I'm putting in the effort to knit something, I want it to be an item that you can actually like see and style as part of an outfit, and not something that's just in my shoes in the end. So I'm not gonna say there isn't a sock pattern out there that would be cool to knit and can be part of an outfit, but I think usually for me it's not quite worth the effort with the socks. If I have the sock yarn at home, obviously I'm gonna use it up though, so hopefully I will be able to finish that project at some point. And then I have a few plans actually. I haven't really made plans for the last few podcast episodes because everything kept going wrong with my projects. I mean, you know the story of the Esther jacket. So I just felt like I should finish my whips and then think about what to do next from here. And now that I really only have some cuffs to knit in ribbing, which I'm very sure I can do, and then some stockinette to knit for the cloud blouse, which I'm also very sure I can do, I felt comfortable to maybe look into the future a tiny bit. So both of the plans that I have to do with my ivy top that I knitted last year. The ivy top was another little fail. Why is this podcast episode so filled with my fails? I'm kind of good at knitting usually. I don't know how that happened. Anyways, this is my ivy top. This is a petite knit pattern, and I cast this on last summer, like late summer already, I believe, because similarly to right now, I had been knitting a bunch of like very complicated projects that needed a lot of thought, and I just wanted a summer top that was simple, knitted down from a pattern in stockinette that I didn't have to have thoughts about, and you know, could just finish quickly and have for the last few weeks of summer. So I got this pattern, and I got the pure silk from Knitting for Olive, which is a recommended yarn for this. And that was pretty much the only thing that went right. So essentially I wanted this to fit kind of tight, maybe even a bit tighter than it does in the sample picture, but I also ended up knitting the size large here, and I could just never figure out a way to make my armhole depth comfortable and then connect in the round in a way where my bust circumference would be like pretty tight to my body. So I went back and forth on this part here, on the front and back parts, a billion times. Like I unraveled that so many times, and I ended with some version that is very far from what is in the pattern. I'm not exactly sure what I did anymore, but I have a project vlog about it and a Ravelry page about it if you are curious about that. So I connected in the round, and then I did some waist shaping over here, which looks quite extreme, but it just makes the top fit me tightly. And well, that was the end of it. I am still not incredibly happy with this project. I really like the color, and I still really like the general like cut and design of this garment, but despite the armhole depth being good and the bust circumference being good, it just, the fabric like kind of folds over here in the front when I'm wearing it. It seems like there's too much fabric here for the armhole, and I'm still not 100% sure why that is. But I think I'm pretty certain that part of it at least is because I knitted this out of the silk, and the pure silk is just, it's not stretchy in the slightest. So I think for how tight I want this to hug my body, it just doesn't work with this fiber. And then I have one more smaller problem with it, which is the waist shaping that I did. I really like the general shape of it, but I just feel like you can really like see the increases here and the decreases. I think that's also just the pure silk not being stretchy and obviously not having like any fluff to it to hide that. And then, I don't know, me being like mad and not paying enough attention to my tension to fix that issue while knitting. So I'm like not 100% happy with this top. I have found good use for it, I would say. I've worn it in the colder months a bunch with a blouse that has a v-neck, so you could see this very pretty stockinette fabric peeking out here and the neckline of it, which I really liked. But for wearing it in the summer, I think it's just not quite good enough to me. I don't like the way that this fabric folds over here, and then paired with the increases that I'm not quite happy with, it's just not something I reach for in the summer. So this is a bit of a sad fail project, and I have some Drops Daisy left over here in this beautiful dark brown that looks really, really good on me. So I was thinking maybe I could try and knit the ivy top again, make it properly fit me this time. And I think with this fiber, with the merino, that should be a lot easier. Like I should be able to have like a little bit of negative ease because there's some stretch, and that way I think the top parts here for the armhole should fit me a lot better. For that I have to give up on my bit puritanical view on what fibers are suitable for summer knitting, but I think I'm kind of doing that anyway. So last summer I was very focused on only doing summer knits like tops and t-shirts and stuff like that if the fibers were actually appropriate for summer. So I would only knit in like cotton, linen, viscose, silk, stuff like that. And I wouldn't like use merino yarns for tops and t-shirts and stuff like that, just because I felt like it would be too warm. But I think I've noticed that for me, for the properly warm days of the year, I'm never gonna want a knitted garment. So even this, even though it is completely made out of silk, or also my lobster topster that I designed, that is made out of drop spell. So there's like cotton and linen and viscose in that, I think. Even those tops I feel like are too warm for me on the warmest summer days. I think that's just because a knitted fabric is always gonna be somewhat thick. And if you like live in Norway and you have like a mild summer or whatever, I think it's completely fine to knit a top like that for the main part of summer. But just for me, with how hot it gets here, I think I will always prefer something store-bought when it is 35 degrees. I'm never gonna wear a knitted top there. So I think I might as well try do this out of a merino, have that for maybe spring, or to put underneath other things in the colder months. I think that works better for me, and I still get to like enjoy the beautiful summer designs without having to use the summer fibers that I'm then not gonna put on in the summer anyway. I think that works a little bit better for me. I'm glad that I figured that out, but I don't know, it was just a learning that came to me in the last few weeks as I was thinking about what I wanted to knit for summer. So there is a chance I might cast on the ivy top with this. I feel like the fabric is pretty thick. I don't know if I could actually wear this for warm weather at all. It's also a very dark color, but I think the way that the ivy top is shaped up here and this color looking really good on me would be a cool combination to reattempt this project in a way that I actually like it. And then I was thinking maybe I could repurpose the yarn that I have in my ivy top right now. As I said, it's the Knitting for All of Pure Silk, so it's quite a nice yarn, and I have a lot left over from it, I think. So I have like 2 extra balls, I believe, on top of what is already in the top. So I've been thinking maybe I could do some designing with that. I don't have like the most solid planes for that yet. I've worked some swatches, this is one of them, and then I worked another one that I already unraveled, and neither of them are going to be it. Like, I still need to think about it a little bit more. I don't want to make any promises that this is actually gonna be like a pattern or anything like that, but I'm thinking like a lace sweater would be kind of nice. I knitted the Madeline sweater by Pernille Larsen last year, and I also did that out of a summery fiber, which is not recommended at all. So I think the recommended fiber is a wool, and I just thought with a sweater that has that many holes, I'm not gonna really wear it in like the winter, so I would prefer to knit it out of a summer fiber, and I did that, and I actually got a lot of use out of it, which I wasn't really expecting. I thought it would be way more difficult to style a sweater like that, but I actually felt like having that for the summer was really nice, because I could always throw it on in the evenings when it got a bit cold, or even in the transitional season as we were going into fall. It was really helpful to have a sweater like that, and then even in fall I could still wear it with a t-shirt or even a long sleeve underneath. So I actually got a lot of use out of it, and I thought it looked really nice. So that's kind of the vibe I'm going for, I hope. Probably not as much positive ease, because I don't have that much yarn, and well, I don't want to like copy the sweater, I already have one. So maybe something like in a mermaid type of theme, but as I said, I'm still working on it. I'm still thinking about it. I don't know what will come of it, and if I can actually figure it out in time for summer. I've been thinking about it for a few weeks now, and I keep going back to it. I think it's a cool idea. I'm still struggling a bit with the execution, because I'm trying to find like a shape that I can infinitely copy next to itself, and it always matches up, but it still like looks nice. And then I want part of it to be this like mesh lace part, and part of it to just be stockinette. So I'm like playing around with that, knitting a lot of swatches and all that. We'll see what I do with that, but you can probably hear some more about that in my next podcast episode in 3 weeks. And until then, I still have my ribbling project vlog that is to be released. That'll depend a little bit on when Laura decides to release the pattern, because it was a test knit. And if you're interested more in depth in what I did with my Esther jacket and with this horse sweater, I have full project vlogs on those as well. So I hope I'll see you in one of those.